Good evening, everyone. Last year at the NATO summit in Lithuania, brought together every member of the G7 to sign a joint declaration of support for Ukraine. 20 countries joined us quickly. Each agreed to forge long-term bilateral commitments with Ukraine. Zelensky and I have just now signed that agreement between the United States and Ukraine. Our goal is to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capabilities for the long term. A lasting peace for Ukraine must be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself now or future aggression anytime in the future. The United States is going to help ensure that Ukraine can do both, not by sending American troops to fight in Ukraine, but weapons and ammunition, expanding intelligence sharing, continuing to train brave Ukrainian troops at bases in Europe and the United States, enhancing interoperability between our militaries in line with NATO standards, investing in Ukraine's defense industrial base, so in time, and supply their own weapons and munitions, working with Ukraine's partners to build a future force that is strong, sustainable, and resilient, and supporting Ukraine's economic recovery, as well as its energy recovery, after Russia has repeatedly targeted Ukraine's energy grid with massive attacks in an attempt to break the will of the Ukrainian people. All these lines of efforts and others are laid out in this agreement. The G7 achieved a significant outcome this week on the matter of Russia's frozen assets in Europe and other places outside of Russia. Back in 2022, 2 days after Russia's invasion, the G7 and the European Union worked together to freeze $280 billion in Russian central bank funds outside of Russia. I'm very pleased to share that this week the G7 signed a plan to finalize and unlock $50 billion from the proceeds of those frozen assets, to put that money to work for Ukraine, and other reminders we're not backing down. In fact, we're standing together against this illegal aggression. The agreement the President and I just signed also lays out our shared vision for a just peace, a peace rooted in the UN Charter and the principles of sovereign integrity, a peace with a broad base of support around the world that holds Russia accountable for the damage it has done in this war. We will see this vision strongly affirmed at the historic peace conference happening in Switzerland this weekend. Harris will represent the United States. Finally, this agreement accelerates Ukraine's integration into the European and Atlantic trade communities. It includes major commitments from Ukraine to impact and to implement democratic, economic, and security reforms, and European Union's accession goals and NATO's programs of reform. While we take this step, the United States is also intensifying pressure on Russia. Yesterday, the U.S. Treasury Department made clear any bank in the world that deals with sanctioned Russian banks, companies, or individuals risk being sanctioned themselves. And we announced roughly 300 new sanctions on individuals and companies that are helping Russia with the war effort. They include the financial sector. I'll wait till it goes over. As well as individual and entities supply Russia with items critical to its defense production, like microelectronics, machine tools, and industrial materials. We also sanction more Russian future energy projects, that Russia's natural projects that are under construction and are not yet fully operational. Putin is counting on revenues from these projects. Our sanctions will disrupt those plans. Plus, our shared concern about countries like China, where resources supplying Russia with materials they need for their war machine. And we agreed to taking collective action to push back activity. Let me close with this. We've taken 3 major steps at the G7 that collectively show Putin he cannot wait us out. He cannot divide. We'll be with Ukraine until they prevail in this war. First is the bilateral security agreement just signed. Second, historic $50 billion in value from Russian sovereign assets to Ukraine. And third, an agreement to ensure our sanctions that disrupt third countries that are supplying Russia's war effort. That will increase pressure on the Russian economy. Collectively, this is a powerful and will create a stronger foundation for Ukraine's success. 2.5 years ago, Putin unleashed a brutal war in Ukraine, and it's been a horrifying ordeal for the Ukrainian people who are so brave and incredible. It's also been a test for the world. With Ukraine, would we stand for sovereignty, freedom, and against tyranny? The United States, the G7, and countries around the world have considered the question by saying, yes, we will. We will say it again. Yes, again and again and again. We're going to stand with Ukraine. And thank you, and I now yield to my friend from Ukraine. President.
Thank you so much, Mr. President Biden, dear President, dear journalists, dear Ukrainians, dear Americans, and thank you so much. Thanks, Italy and Georgia, for invitation. Dear friends, today is a historic day, and we have signed the strongest agreement between Ukraine and US since our independence. And this is an agreement on security and thus on the protection of human life. This is an agreement on cooperation, on how our nations will become stronger. This is an agreement on steps to guarantee sustainable peace, and therefore it benefits everyone in the world, because the Russian war against Ukraine is a real global threat. I thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership, which is reflected in particular in your years of support for Ukraine. I thank our teams, both teams. Thanks very much for making sure that the details are really good. And of course, I want to thank every Ukrainian soldier, our people whose courage made this level of alliance between Ukraine and the United States possible. And I am proud of our people and what Ukraine can do, and I'm very grateful to all Americans, to everyone in America who strengthens leadership. So, under the points of the agreement, first, the agreement contains a very detailed, legally binding part, and this the credibility of America's support for our Ukrainian independence. Secondly, security commitments from the United States are based, among other things, on the sustainability of security and defense support, not only for the duration of this war, but also for the period of peace after the war. And we will definitely ensure peace. Third, it clearly states that America supports Ukraine's efforts to win this war. Fourth, the agreement has good provisions on weapons for our defense, very specifically on the Patriot systems, very specifically on the supply of fighter squadrons to Ukraine. That's right, plural squadrons, including but not limited to F-16. We have worked for a long time for this. The agreement is also very specific about the supply of the necessary weapons, joint production, and strengthening defense industries of our countries through our cooperation. And this is something that will not only provide security, but also new good jobs for Ukrainians and Americans. The agreement also outlines what is needed in terms of intelligence information. The agreement contains key aspects of protecting the lives of our. Fifth, it is very important that the agreement also addresses the issue of Russia's responsibility for this war and its attempts to destroy Ukrainians. America supports both fair compensation for the damage caused by Russian strikes and working out to ensure that frozen Russian assets are used to protect and rebuild The agreement also includes sanctions and export controls that will make Russia feel the pain for what it is doing against the freedoms. And two more things. I'm grateful that the philosophy of our security agreement is, in fact, the philosophy of the alliance. And that is why the issue of NATO is covered through the text of the agreement. It states that America supports Ukraine's future membership in NATO and recognizes that our security is a bridge to Ukraine's membership in NATO. It is very important for all Ukrainians and for all Europeans to know that there will be no deficit in Europe which tempts the aggressor to war and makes the future uncertain. Now we are clearly defining everything. We will cooperate for the sake of victory, make peace guarantees effective, and provide the necessary security to our people. And thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership in the G7's decision on 50 billion loan for Ukraine. It's a vital step forward in providing sustainable support for Ukraine in winning this war. Russian immobilized assets should be used for defending lives of Ukrainians from Russia and for repaying the damage aggressor caused to Ukraine. It's fair and absolutely right. Mr. President, thank you, your team. I would also like to thank the United States Congress for their support, both parties, both chambers. Thank you, and thanks to every American heart that does not betray freedom and supports us. Slava Ukraini!
Now what we'll do is we're going to take American reporters and a question each from two American reporters and a question each from two Ukrainian reporters. The first person I'm to call on is Associated Press.
Thanks, Mr. President. About 2 weeks ago, you changed course to allow Ukraine or U.S. weapons into Russia. Given the reported successes, would you consider further expanding the parameters on U.S. weapons into Russia, even despite your concerns about escalation? And on the news from home, you're going through something that so many American families go through, the intersection of addiction and the criminal justice system. But you're most families. Was your son able to get a fair trial? Do you believe the Justice Department operated independently of politics? And for President...
Let me answer your question and you ask his question, okay? With regard to the first question, it is clear that the near abroad, meaning just across the line, the border with Russia and Ukraine, that it makes a lot of sense for Ukraine to be able to take out or combat what is coming across that border. In terms of longer-range weapons into the interior of Russia, we have not changed our position on that sort. With regard to the question regarding the family, I'm extremely proud of him. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that.
President Zelensky, a number of leaders here in Italy, including President Biden, are facing election challenges. How will the security agreement tonight and the other promises of support continue if they are not in office? And what's your contingency plan if they don't?
Дякую вам за запитання. If I can I answer in Ukrainian language? Yes, thank you so much. Передусім, я хочу подякувати народам всіх країн, безумовно, Сполученим Штатам, країнам Європи, інших континентів, які нас підтримували з самого початку абсолютно несправедливої війни Росії проти людей України. І саме так вони вбивали людей. Домівки, все це дуже важливо, це частина життя, але перш за все люди, життя людей. І тому ця війна була не з самого початку, війна цього зла, ім'я його Путін, проти людей. І він вбив дуже багато людей. Казати, що це не він, що це військовий, це інструмент для нього. Розумієте, він грає на цьому інструменті. І тому для нас дуже важливо було, що з самого початку нас підтримали люди, народи, тому що вони зрозуміли, що ми поділяємо спільні цінності, ми просто хочемо жити, і люди розуміли, вони уявили, що буде, якщо на них нападе таке зло. Нас люди підтримали, і я дякую і президенту Байдену, і іншим лідерам, які з самого початку вторгнення підтримали. Вони базуючись на своїх цінностях, вони базувались на голосі їх людей, їх народів. І без народу це неможливо. І я впевнений, цей народ обирає собі лідерів, обирає президентів. І мені здається, що кого б не обрав народи, передусім, мені здається, все залежить від єдності всередині тієї чи іншої держави. І якщо з нами буде народ, будь-який лідер також буде з нами в цій боротьбі за свободу.
Call on a Ukrainian reporter.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you so much. Так, будь ласка.
Irina Ivanova, Inter-TV channel Ukraine, and I have a question for both leaders. Today, during the G7 meeting, the discussion focused on developing Ukraine's air defense system based on the most advanced Western complexes and also on enhancing long-range capability. My question is, can you provide any details on the initiative and about the readiness of our allies to take part in it? Thank you.
I'd be happy to respond to that. We have acquired commitment from 5 countries so far for Patriot batteries and other air defense systems, as well as we've let it be known to those countries that are expecting from us air defense systems in the future, that they're going to have to wait. Everything we have is going to go to Ukraine until their needs are met, and then we will make good on the commitments we made to other countries.
I think President Biden already answered your question. Really, he knows, all other partners, they know that urgently we need 7 Patriot systems. Yes, to save our cities, not all of them. It's a pity, but urgently 7. And we discussed the possibility of having 5 of them. It's true, but work on it. It doesn't mean that tomorrow we will have these 5 systems, but we see in the closest future result for Ukraine.
You'll have some relatively quickly. American reporter, Josh Weingrove, Bloomberg.
Mr. President, I have a question for President Zelensky shortly on the announcements, but if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you about your discussions on the situation in Gaza here at the summit. You were asked just a short time ago about it after the skydiving demonstration. Can you give us your assessment of Hamas's response? Do you believe that they are trying to work towards a deal, or is this response working against a deal? And is your message to allies, including those here at the G7, about more, if anything, the U.S. can do to drive towards a peace agreement? Thank you.
I wish you guys would a little play by the rules. I'm here to talk about a critical situation in Ukraine. You asked me another subject. I'll be happy to answer later. But the bottom line is that we've made an agreement. I've laid out an approach that has been endorsed by the UN Security Council, by the G7, by the Israelis. And the biggest hang-up so far is Hamas refusing to sign on, even though they submitted something similar. Whether it comes to fruition remains to be seen. We're going to continue to push. I don't have a final answer for you.
And a question about today's discussions. President Zelensky, the $50 billion today, you've had this course from the U.S. Congress recently. Can you give us an assessment of the situation on the battlefield right now and what has been given now, how in terms of either stopping the Russian advance or making headway on this, and how long will it last you if indeed future leaders or current leaders are unable to reach consensus on further aid packages? And President Biden, I'd welcome your assessment of the situation currently on the battlefield and what difference the supplemental has made as well, sir. Thank you.
Дякую за ваше запитання. Ми дійсно очікували фундаментального підтримки в Конгресі Сполучених Штатів Америки. І ми дійсно, це була велика пауза для наших воїнів передусім. Але важливо, і ми вдячні, що в кінці ми маємо цей пакет і точно посилення. Так, це дало можливість на цю паузу 6-8 місяців ворогу спробувати окупувати Харків. Ця спроба була зупинена нашими воїнами, була дана відсіч і, незважаючи ні на що, зірвали їх всі плани. Мені здається, що це найголовніше, що дає цей пакет, який прийде. Цей пакет дає можливість укомплектувати ті резерви, ті хлопців, ті бригади, які готові для того, щоб вони можливість дали націям. Щоб ті хлопці, які втомлені, які на полі бою, щоб могли вони відпочити, щоб могли бригади відновитись, щоб замість них вийшли з технікою. Ось що дає цей пакет. І підняття морального духу, і підняття сили наших бригад. Мені здається, що це найголовніше. А скільки це вистачить? Дивіться, ми без пакету тримались 8 місяців. І ніякого успіху у русських не було. І тому питання вистачить, мені здається, правильніше, наскільки вистачить єдності в світі. Єдності в Штатах разом з європейськими лідерами. Як будуть впливати ті чи інші вибори на цю. Мені здається, на це потрібно дивитись саме так. Зберегти єдність, зберегти цілісність світу, цілісність демократичного світу. Тому що, якщо не витримає Україна, не витримає, я впевнений, демократія багатьох.
By the way, the idea that we had to wait till we passed the legislation overall, even held up by a small majority of our Republican colleagues, was just terrible. There's a lot more money coming beyond what's already come, tranches that are available now that we've passed the legislation. So they'll have what they need and get it there as quickly as we possibly can.
Much, Mr. President. Telegraph, будь ласка. Telegraph, please.
My name is Yaroslav Zharinov, Telegraph UA. Thank you for this opportunity. I have a long way from Kyiv and have enough time to prepare such long question. Firstly, to Joe Biden. Mr. Ukraine Supplemental Appropriations Act that you signed mandated the submission of strategy war for the war in Ukraine within 45 days after its enactment. This deadline passed on June 8th, and now yet the international community this strategy. Has it been developed? And if the strategy is classified, what step does your administration plan to take to hasten Ukraine victory in the war? It's my first question. The second, President Zelensky.
What was the last part of your question?
Has it been developed, this strategy, and what does your administration plan to take to victory Ukraine in the war?
The steps we're going to take to make sure that Ukraine has victory and that Russia does not prevail is continued support. What we just signed. We signed that, and a significant number signed it. We have convinced the G7, we've got support of the G7, and quite frankly, 47 sat with the Prime Minister of Japan, South Korea. We have 50 nations who signed up beyond the NATO and the G7. And so we're going to stay. With regard to the plan, that is a plan in process now. We're discussing with our Ukrainian friends exactly what we have a lot of movement toward that. We know lines of it. We have not done the detail of it all. But we know what Ukraine is capable of doing when given the materials, and that's exactly what they're doing now.
І друге запитання до президента Зеленського, буде українською. Останнім часом ви зробили ряд досить різких заяв на адресу Китаю, і при цьому в пресі поширюються чутки про можливий початок поставок китайського озброєння до Російської Федерації. Окрім цього, ймовірно, просуває власний мирний план серед інших країн. Які мотиви у Пекіну зараз? Чи можливо, на вашу думку, передбачення Китаю і яка в цьому роль Сполучених Штатів? Ну і питання, чи є, на вашу думку, Китай спільником Росії у війні проти нашої нації? Дякую.
Скільки? Too many questions. Okay, but yes, I understood that your trip was long. First of all, I had a phone conversation with the leader of China by phone. He said that he will not sell any weapon to Russia. That is the first. We'll see with you. We'll see. But he said to me, if he is a respectable person, he will not, because he gave me the word. The second, you know very good with details our peace formula. It's very open for everybody, basing on charter. Yes, your nation, and you know that it bases on territorial integrity, sovereignty, nuclear security, food security. If China has alternative view on it, it can prepare alternative peace formula. If we share common views on it, like with globally with all the world, I think so. So if they share the same way to peace, we will find dialogue.
Way, China is buying weapons, but the ability to produce those weapons and the technology available. So it is, in fact, helping Russia.